Well, there you are. I was beginning to think you wouldn't show up today. But I know how important story time is to you guys, so I figured I'd see you at some point. Welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you guys started on some great stories and some great times once again. This first story comes to us from subaruligan, and it's a topic I know that many of you love dearly, which is Appalachian Horror. So, let's start our morning with a little Appalachian Horror. I grew up in southern Appalachia, in western North Carolina, 30 minutes outside the town of Asheville. The hills and hollers of the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, with some of the rock formations dating back over 1 billion years. That quite literally means they were here before there were terrestrial animals. As with most things that have been on Earth for a long time, there are inexplicable anomalies, both benevolent and malevolent. For example, the Brown Mountain Lights. Never in my life have I felt threatened or uneasy when witnessing them from Wiseman's view. They're neither good nor evil. They just are. On the benevolent side, sometimes you can walk through an abandoned old church up near my mom and dad's property, and you can feel a good, warm, happy energy. It's like that first warm day of summer when the sunshine is not too hot, but not too cold either. Well, this story is not about one such anomaly. It's about something that's definitely malevolent. About a decade ago, I was in night school at the AB Tech, going to school for automotive mechanics. I would go into class about 2 p.m. after I got off my part-time job, and I would end up getting home about 10:30, depending on the traffic, that is. Every night I drove the same road in my old 1973 W200 Dodge pickup. Some nights it would get rather boring, and I would take a different route, jump off of I-40 and drive the back roads. On this particular evening, I had decided to just stay on the I-40 because I just wanted to get home and go to bed. It was Thursday, and there was no class on Friday. I wanted to get in bed early so I could go up in the woods and go hiking early tomorrow morning and watch the sun come up. As I jumped off the I-40 onto the exit where my parents lived, the night seemed to get darker, and none of the animals that I could hear through my rolled-down windows made any more noise. The cab of my truck became smaller and smaller, and my breath quickened. I've never faced any kind of anxiety in my life, but at that moment, something felt off, and there was no way I could put my finger on what it was. I came to a stop on the exit ramp, turned to go down the road, and happened to notice that the gas station off the exit where Mom and Dad lived had no lights on. They were a 24-hour truck stop and always had lights on, but I didn't think about it again after noticing. I just chalked it up to a power outage, but I could not shake the feeling that something was definitely askew. I slowly shifted through all the old truck gears, not wanting to make any more noise than an old pickup truck already did. I leaned over my steering wheel to look up at the moon through the windshield, and there was barely any stars visible, which was way out of the ordinary. If you've ever been to Appalachia, primarily the sparsely populated areas where I'm from, you can see the Milky Way on a clear night. An absence of stars back home is only due to cloud cover, or whatever in the hell went on this particular night. As I rounded a particularly sharp left-hand curve and chugged through a straight stretch before the next right-hander, I looked at the ancient, decaying barn I always gazed at when riding that stretch of road, and thought about how long that thing had been here, and how many advancements and civilizations it had seen. For the split second that my gaze wandered, a very large, sickly-looking dog ran out in front of my truck, no more than 10 feet in front of me. Old Betsy was a good truck, but she didn't stop well. Thump, thump! I heard the fence post I had left in my truck bounce up in the bed, and then back into it as I slid to a stop. My first thought was, oh God, now I have to go tell these neighbors that I ran over their dog. That shit doesn't go real far with people around here. It can really kinda set them off, depending on the dog and the person. As I sat there breathing in the smell of burning rubber, something else found its way into my nose. The stench of rotting flesh. It It's not a smell you ever forget once you smell it one time. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I just chalked it up to some rotting roadkill nearby. Finally, I thought to myself, let me check and see who this dog belongs to. I pushed my clutch in, shifted to reverse, and as I looked in my rearview mirror, illuminated by the haunting glow of my reverse lamps, was the same dog, only it wasn't on four legs anymore. It stood up, like a man over 10 feet tall. Only then did it dawn on me that the front of my truck was every bit of 5 feet tall, and this dog was every bit of 5 feet tall at the shoulders on all fours. As it turned its head to look in the direction of my truck, I caught only a glimpse of this creature. It was not a dog. It certainly was not a man. It was somewhere in between, and at the same time, entirely separate altogether. Its skin hung loose off its emaciated frame, like a raccoon. Bits of matted fur and dirt and mud clung to its legs like a disease. The right arm seemed a little bit longer than the left, and they both hung abnormally low in relation to either animal this creature seemed to be. As it regained its senses, it turned and looked into the mirror like it knew exactly where I was sitting. The face was that of a man, but the very edges of its face seemed not to be totally defined. They seemed to move and change, like something you could see at a cellular level in a scientific documentary. There were no eyes, but only sockets where eyes should be. No hair either, and the skin that was dripping off its face was a cold, lifeless gray color. The nose was short and shoved into its face like a bulldog, but the teeth still haunt me. It was definitely carnivorous, and true to form, the rest of its unnatural look, many of its teeth didn't seem to be arranged in a natural way in its mouth. They seemed to fill and spill forth from the undefinable face, almost like they knew the horror they occupied, and they were searching for a way out. It stared through my life, into my eyes and past my soul. It seemed like an eternity, but it could not have been more than 5 seconds that I sat there paralyzed. A light came on at the house next to the road, causing the creature to snap its gaze in that direction, tear off into the woods on its back 2 legs. I jammed my old truck into first gear and roasted tires all the way through first, snatched second, and drove as fast as I could home. When I got to the house, both my parents were asleep. I went downstairs into my bedroom and loaded every firearm I possessed and locked all the doors. I couldn't wake them up. Who would believe that? And at 10:30 on a Thursday night? The basement was eerily quiet that night. Even their dog that got up to raise hell outside if any animal came close was dead silent. The old post and beam house didn't even creak or pop that night, as was usual. At about 3 a.m., I finally started to get drowsy, and as I went to lay my head down and get some sleep so I could still attempt to go hiking the next morning, I smelled the stench of death again. It was faint at first, but it was definitely there. I thought to myself, you're just going crazy. None of that was real. But as I dwelt on it, it became more and more noticeable until it filled the entire basement. My dad has a home office in the basement with 2 large glass doors that face the Pisgah National Forest, an impenetrable 500,000 acre wood. I finally worked up the courage to walk out of my bedroom and into the basement's living area, with my little tactical 12-gauge loaded tack light on. I covered the flashlight with my hand so as not to make my presence known until it needed to be, and as I turned right out of the living room into my dad's office, I shined the light through the glass doors, and at the edge of the woods, there stood the creature. It was motionless. It stared right into the light, unafraid, with those soulless sockets devoid of eyes. I quickly covered my tack light, ran into the living room, and flipped on the outside floodlights in my surprise. But it was no longer standing at the edge of the woods, but between the house and the edge of the woods, still motionless. I swung the door open and fired every round I had in its direction. I must have scored a couple of hits because it screeched an unearthly scream, like that of a woman being slaughtered as it took to the woods. The dog went crazy. Mom and Dad woke up asking what the hell I was doing. I told them that a bear had gotten into the trash and I was scaring it away. They didn't believe me, but I know they wouldn't believe the truth either. I didn't sleep that night or any time until the following Sunday. Everything seemed to return to normal, and I didn't think about the creature again until I met my wife about 6 years ago. Her mother's house sits at the mouth of the holler, no more than 4 or 5 miles up the road from my mother and father's house. Up on the side of the holler, there's a kennel for her brother's hunting dogs. No longer in use, and hasn't been for years, but the fence is still there, and the concrete pads are still there. It's a thing of great use when you need to quarantine an animal. Her Great Pyrenees had gotten into a tussle with a raccoon, which of course he destroyed, but his rabies vaccine had lapsed, so we had to keep him quarantined for a time. It didn't bother him. He kinda liked solitude. This particular night, we were coming home from a movie date in the neighboring town. Was the last night of quarantine for him. So we walked up the trail, using our phone flashlights to get to the kennel, and there he sat, patiently waiting, tail wagging, happy to see us. We put him on a leash and started walking him back towards the house with us. As we were walking back through the darkness, I started to feel that same feeling I'd felt the night I hit the creature in my truck. I didn't say anything so as not to alarm my wife, but when the smell came wafting in on the breeze, she jokingly asked me, "My God, what did you eat? You stink." I half laughed, not being able to fully appreciate the joke for the horror that raged in my mind. She immediately caught on and asked what was wrong, to which I could only reply, "I'll tell you later." She grew up in the woods and around hunting and things of that nature her whole life, so she knew what I meant. She knew we were being watched by something. When we could see the lights of the house from the trail to the kennel, we heard it. There came barking from the kennel that sound just like the Great Pyrenees we had on a leash next to us. It was a perfect imitation. The Pyrenees, being a guardian dog, immediately sensed that something was wrong, and so he turned to face the danger, belting out a deep bark and growl in that direction. I don't know if you've ever had to drag a 150-pound dog, but it sucks, and it's no easy task. I'm 6 feet, 240 pounds, and it was all I could do to get him back in the house. The barking never ceased the entire time we were running for the house. In fact, it seemed to grow closer and closer, till it seemed it was coming from inside my own head. Her mother heard the commotion and flipped the floodlights on, and we made it to the fence of the yard as I caught a glimpse of something coming to a dead stop at the end where the lights reached, wheeling around and tearing off into the darkness. My wife looked at me and said, "You want to tell me what the hell that was?" To which I replied, "Yes, let's go inside." I told her the story, and she listened intently, hanging on to every word. Her family came from a long line of granny witches and other supernatural healers from Appalachia, so her older sister came over the next morning with some herbs and chants to bless the property and to ward off evil. I suggested we go up to the dog kennels and do them as well. When we got to the kennels, they were completely destroyed. The very concrete foundation was cracked, and the chain-link fence was torn off its post. The dog houses were destroyed, and the place reeked of the stench that followed that creature. My wife's older sister just went about her business like normal, blessed the place, burnt some herbs, and led us back to the property. When we got into the house, she wheeled about on us suddenly and instructed us very firmly to never go into the woods after dark, not until this thing left me alone. To make a long story short, my wife joined the military, and she ended up getting stationed in Delaware. Well, as someone who lived around fairly large mountains and endless wilderness their entire life, Delaware is pretty terrible. At least, that was my thought when we first moved into the middle of a 50,000-plus population city. Fortunately, though, it didn't take long to find a house in a sleepy little community further south. We purchased the house and moved in with haste. We were both very grateful and glad to be out of the city and into a rural setting again. The land in Delaware seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia. The sparsely populated woods don't possess any energy that goes one way or t'other. The ground doesn't seem to be alive like it is in Appalachia. Having had no thoughts about the creature in a long time, I resumed my staying outside after dark and playing with our dogs in a rather large yard that bordered on a small patch of woods. Well, last night I went outside to play with the dogs, and as dark set in, I built a decent-sized fire in my fire pit and consumed some good old-fashioned Appalachian Mountain cough syrup from a mason jar. And just as the fire was dying down, my American bulldog tore off towards the woods. He has a habit of running off to go on adventures, so my immediate instinct was to chase him down in the yard and tackle him so he couldn't get away. As I tackled his 110-pound ass to the ground and threw him in a fireman's carry over my shoulder, I heard him begin to bark. Only the bark wasn't coming from him. The only sound coming from him was a deep, rumbling growl, a noise I've never heard him make before. It was a threatening noise. Something was definitely wrong, and as I ran with him on my shoulder back to the house, the stench of death again began to fill the air. The other two dogs must have caught the wind and what was happening, and met me at the back door, which I threw open, slammed shut, and locked as I again began to load firearms. How the hell could this thing have followed us 650 miles up here? As I flipped the floodlights on at the back side of the house, several of the bushes and small trees at the forest's edge were still shaking like something had just run through them. My dogs went crazy all night, barking and howling and attempting to get out of the windows. I didn't sleep a bit, and I don't think I will for a while. I know for sure I won't be in the woods after dark again. Not in life. Not until this thing is gone. It's always a pleasure to revisit the land of Appalachia and the wonderful stories that reside there. Let's hit something a little shorter next, though, I think. It's a small story, but it's a good one, I think. Written by Janky Cranky, another writer we see a lot on this channel. It's a story about another place you may be fond of, a place you'd also like to spend a lot of time. Let's hear about the bar incident.
I've always stayed sober, as that's a requirement for working as a bartender. You also have to know when one is drunk by the way they walk, the way they talk, and all that. Drunk driving is a major cause of death, after all. The local band was playing some good slow jazz that night. The van that arrived that day was a pretty red. About 8 or 9 people came out of the red van, a sign that they were carpooling. Apparently, the van's driver wanted to make sure that they weren't going to drive home drunk. The dive bar I've been working at always has at least one person going violent in a drunken rage, and last night would have had the usual customer going super crazy after getting drunk, if not for what had happened. The group I was serving was a real piece of work. Each of them ordered Twitch bitches and undying totes, and only one of the guys in the group seemed to not be drinking. "Hey, come on, Norman. Why aren't you joining us?" "Yeah, Norman, don't you enjoy alcohol once in a while?" No thanks. I'm allergic." The dirty bum slammed him down. "Come on, Norm. Can't you have a drink at least once?" "Nah," Doc said. "Sucks to be your doctor. Why don't you drink and have some fun?" The band stopped for about 5 seconds. Then they resumed playing, and I asked Norm about his allergy. "Look, miss, alcohol give me the hives for days. There's no way I'm going to be able to do it. I'm only here for the music. And the billiards." "Come on, Norman, that's BS. You know you want to drink." Then those guys started chanting, "Norman! Norman! Norman!" The man refused, even when they were putting the pressure on him. "Screw you guys. Screw you," and then one of the guys from the red van had forced him to drink. He pushed it right up against his lips and forced it down his throat. I should have known something was off from the beginning, but I just went on with my job. Once the drink got into Norman, his body fell to the floor and he started convulsing. The convulsions were violent, and I was about to call an ambulance on him when I heard a loud crack come from him. His eyes turned black and yellow. His normal, clean teeth were replaced with sharp yellow fangs. His ginger-colored hair became rough spines and horns. The rest of him made me want to vomit into the nearby trash can. The normal human body with the torso and legs and arms was replaced with something like that of a wolf, but more oily and with claws all over. None of the other guys were aware. They were all too drunk to realize what was going on. The monster that was Norman roared so loud that the band stopped playing, and each band member stared at him with a horrified look on their face. All the other employees were staring in shock as the Norman monster slashed each of the customers to pieces. I reached for my rifle and kept on shooting the Norman monster, but he just wouldn't die. The dive bar owner finally lost it when one of my coworkers got beheaded. The Norman monster kept swinging his claws on all the drunken bums, and they were all bleeding out. It was when the local police officer showed up with a strong tranquilizer gun that he finally got calm. The monster went to sleep by the tranquilizer darts, and once he fell asleep, he changed back into Norman. The incident never made it past the local paper. Normally something this crazy would have made the national news, but it didn't. The bar is currently closed for cleanup and sanitation, so that none of us get sick from the COVID-19. I'm on paid leave for until the bar opens again, since the owner is responsible for the damages caused. I have no involvement in the incident, other than serving the drinks to those guys. But now, I seem to have an aversion to alcohol. Not to serving it, but to drinking it. Every time I see a drink, my own guts keep hurting like I shouldn't be near it. I think Norman's infection may have transferred over to me.
Sometimes it seems like the short stories are the best, but I know you guys prefer the longer ones. So let's move right along into a longer tale by our own JayDarkmoore about a chair that calls to people and knows what makes them shiver. It's, of course, the chair of fear.
"Come right this way," the doctor said, as I got up from the chair in the waiting room. He was wearing a long white coat, and the harsh strip lighting bounced off his thick glasses. I thought it funny that doctors still wore long white coats. It was somewhat cliché in this age, and I found that somewhat peculiar, but I didn't feel compelled to mention his attire. He knew, as did everyone else in this building, who laid eyes on me as I walked in, that I was desperate. We moved through a room in which a receptionist sat with her head buried in the latest Vogue magazine. The doctor gestured to her as we moved past and through the door at the end of the hallway. The room took me by surprise. It was illuminated, but with no obvious source of light. The walls were a scaled gray like one might find on a fish that had been pulled out of water prior to being filleted. The object of my focus, however, was the chair that stood empty in the middle of the room. He gestured for me to take a seat, to which I complied. Despite my growing anxiety, like spiders hatching in my stomach, I refrained from asking any questions about what was about to unfold. The screening process was simple, with just one question on the application form. Are you desperate for a change in your life? The answer to that was a resounding yes, to which I filled in the application in the paper and submitted it. I had been happy to hear from him a few days later. I had received correspondence through the post with the sigil of the establishment, the Facility of Emotional and Adrenal Research, or FEAR for short, arriving on the carpet of my one-bedroom flat. Thankfully, I hadn't slept very well, meaning that when the letterbox rattled, I was upon the envelope in a second. The discarded beer cans and half-finished pizza boxes that lined the floor cushioned the letter like a falling feather on snow. Upon arrival, I completed the medical questionnaire and presented my identification. The box labeled Emergency Contact remained blank, however. I imagined, given my acquaintance with such an experimental proposal, that this made me a prime candidate. The doctor studied me as I took a seat in the chair, as I studied the furnishing itself. "Why is it bolted to the floor?" I inquired, my voice falling flat in the empty room. At first I was unsure if he had heard me, but his mustache quivered as his mouth craned in a stretching grin. "It's just a precaution." He left the room for a moment, leaving me to my own thoughts. He returned with a small leather bag and opened the flap, which lay like a dead tongue. I eyed the dark innards like a mystery box one might find in a fairground attraction, the kind that dared you to place your hand inside its fleshy mouth, if you were brave enough. He produced a line of leather that resembled a coiled snake. My heart fluctuated, and a sharp intake of breath escaped my lips. The doctor stopped and eyed me with an ashen eye. "Worried?" I shook my head and forced a wry smile. He relaxed and continued to produce more leather straps from the bag. I scolded myself mentally. Keep a lid on it, I thought. You need this. You need the money. A fresh start. Don't mess this up. He took out the leather braces and wrapped them around my wrists and ankles, fastening me to the chair. "How are those?" he said, as he pulled the buckles on the restraints tight. I again nodded. They were tight, and I could feel the circulation beginning to dwindle in my extremities. A prickling developed on the tips of my fingers. Still, I held that strange smile. The doctor finished securing the bindings and took one final contraption from the bag. It resembled a bicycle helmet with green and blue diodes attached to the top, resembling light bulb filaments. He secured the silver instrument to my head, fastened it with a strap under my chin. He stood back then, marveling at his work. The experiment is simple. It has 3 stages. The first, a count of 30 seconds. Upon completion, you will receive 5,000 pounds. My heartbeat picked up. The second stage, 3 minutes, and you will receive 100,000 pounds. Sweat began to creep along my brow. And the third and final step of the experiment is for 10 minutes, to which you will receive 500,000 pounds. He checked the straps again. How does that sound? I tried to nod, but I couldn't move my neck. Click your fingers if you're happy with that. I did, and he nodded. I'll be in the other room monitoring your heartbeat, your hormone levels, and your brain function. If at any point you wish the experiment to be over, simply click your fingers or shout out for it to stop, and I will shut the machine off. However, if you feel you're becoming too excitable, then we will end the experiment on your behalf. He tapped a small circular disc on the arm of the chair. This dial is graded from blue to red. The needle will give you an indication of your stress level. Blue being you are floating on a cloud. Red, you are at risk of heart failure. For your own peace of mind. Peace of mind, I thought. Yeah, thanks. He stood behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder. Your safety is our main concern. Thank you for helping the Fear Research Facility. We thank you for your cooperation. He stood in front of me then, his face now awash with concern, whether real or imagined. However, one final caveat. Payment is only available to those who complete either steps 1, 2, or 3. If you accept stage 1 and begin stage 2, any ejection from the experiment will result in no money paid out. His tone was serious and grave, like explaining how to tie a harness before you dive off a cliff. You must commit to the completion of the next stage. It's part of the test. A world of excuses and possibilities swam before my mind like black waters filling with hungry sharks. Dare I dive into that snapping abyss and pull myself out before it got too late? The fear in my heart began to swell like a straining balloon filled with septic bile, but I pushed it down to the depths of my stomach. In desperation, it would seem, a man was capable of resorting to self-annihilation. The doctor was waiting for a response, the silence so thick that I could hear my own blood pumping in my body. I'll take your silence as a wish to continue, he said, moving to the door and placing his hands on the handle before turning back to me. Just remember, whatever you see, feel, or hear can't hurt you. With that, he left the room, and the black rectangle on the wall fired into life as a countdown from 30 began. Are you ready to begin? His voice sounded tinny, pushed through a speaker from somewhere unseen. I thought this must be another test, so I remained silent, seeing if he could break my resolve with a form of abandonment anxiety. A drone bellowed out of the speaker, and the counter began. The first thing I felt was a feeling of nausea, but I put it down to my nerves. I could taste the money already, and the new life that came with it. A new home, rehab, a girlfriend, new clothes, a working shower, a holiday to somewhere hot with orange juice instead of whiskey. The prickle of hairs on my legs pulled me from my daydream. The dial began to move from the end of blue to a dull green. I breathed deeply, only 20 seconds left on the clock. I saw its shape creep over my knee. It was huge, the largest one I'd seen in my life. I clenched my teeth so hard I thought they might splinter. I swallowed dryly. How did they know I suffered from this fear? Was it the machine, or had they been watching me? The tarantula, brown and bulbous, fingered its way up into my lap and then onto my stomach. I could see the glint of light bouncing off its eyes, the venom dripping from its fangs. 17, 16. The spider slowly continued north towards my face. Its legs pulled at the fabric of my clothes like
unlatching Velcro. Goosebumps ravaged my skin. The room grew hotter, my clothes beginning to stick to me. 10, 9. Its legs prickled against my neck. 2 of its legs fingered my lips as I clenched down tight to hold back the scream that was bubbling into my throat. The thing crawled onto my face. I could smell it, the stench of dust and dead rodents, its needle-like fur sticking into my cheek and eyelids. I had to close my eyes, had to stop it from getting closer, but I couldn't. I was frozen in a perpetual terror, like I had caught a glance of Medusa herself. All I could see was its shape in my vision, blocking out the light of the room. Its fangs pierced through the soft shell of my eye, burying deep into the jelly. The scream came then, the loud bark as pain so indescribable ravaged through me. I rattled in the bolted chair, fingers splayed trying to break free. The monster hung from my bleeding eye socket as it chewed and sucked and fed. Blood, thick like hot jam, seeped from my wound, gelatinous fragments filtering inside my screaming mouth. Copper mixed with my saliva, and I coughed and heaved. I felt hands gripping hold of me, a cacophony of voices barraging my ears through spastic hiccups of agony that exploded from my ragged lungs. I snapped my eyes open to see the doctor staring at me with disdain. Another man was behind him, built and broad and mean-looking. I looked around. I was unharmed. The leather bindings had bitten and gnawed at my flesh, the sensation of burning stinging along my wrist. My eyes, both of them, were completely fine. I frantically looked around the room, abating my wailing and replacing it with complete disillusion. Where? I coughed over and over. Where is it? Tears fell from my eyes, dousing my reddening cheeks. I looked up at the counter. I had 4 seconds left. 4 seconds away from a new life. I think we better take you out of the chair, the doctor said, and he began to unstrap me. The cool air outside the building bit into my sweat-sodden clothing as I was led out the front door. The doctor stood with a pained look, handing me back my ID and my documentation. Do come back if you wish to participate in another experiment, he said, a coy look in his eye. We'd be happy to see you again. With that, he left me standing on the pavement, his body vanishing behind the foggy glass of the double doors. Another soul, standing from the blue chairs in the waiting room, following him like a lost puppy at the sniff of a complete reformation. I do like the tales of old JayDarkmoore there. He's got a couple of books out himself, so if you're interested in reading some fine horror, I know you can find them on Amazon. You can find mine there too, but I know most of you guys own my collection already. Moving on from Chairs of Fear to Fearful Woods, let's hear a story by our friend Loki 382, a classic setup about a creature in the woods. The leaves crunched as I walked along the vast, beautiful forest. The blinding sun shone ever so brightly in the sky, setting ever so slowly over the horizon. A breezy wind blew through the forest, singing a quiet song in my ears as I continued to walk. I could hear the sound of animals scurrying through the forest, giving life to the terrain that Mother Nature ever so graciously built. As I navigated my way through the forest, I looked around at all the shady trees as I jumped over all the logs that lay on the ground. I imagined the life each tree had had, how many people throughout history had walked the same path I was. Each tree was a story to be told, each as old as nature itself. I was a big thinker as a kid, always asking my parents questions about how the world worked. I was always in my head, wandering around the worlds that I created. Worlds of cities built with bright diamonds, fantasy lands where I was the hero of my own tale. Nature was my escape from everything. I would imagine myself fighting the ferocious beast that I had created in my head, or that I was on an adventure to Mordor with Frodo. This time, I imagined I was walking on the Death Trail in search of an ancient treasure buried by Blackbeard himself.
I fought devilish beasts whose teeth could destroy a whole tree with a single bite, a dragon whose eyes shined with crimson and breathed fire as hot as the sun. The forest was my favorite place to think, for this inviting evergreen forest was beautiful in every way. The sound of squirrels chattering could be heard as the birds sang their final song, for the sun was setting slowly on the horizon. Bright, vibrant colors filled the sky. The forest sparkled as sunlight crackled across the trees, lighting up the dirt path ahead of me, decorated with roots and flowers of many kinds. It was lively. The sound of scurrying could be heard on every side. The leaves and twigs crunched under my feet, and the branches hung as if they were welcoming me. I breathed gracefully, my body feeling a slight chill as I walked through the path. I was deep inside my imagination when the sound of water took me out of my thoughts. I always hated that sound. It meant that soon I'd have to turn back. I continued my way, trying to ignore the sound, but it was becoming increasingly harder as I reached the river. I slowed my pace, trying to prolong my journey back home. It wasn't long, though, until I saw the sparkling blue river, the sound of crashing water filling my ears as I reached my endpoint. I stopped and cleaned off my arms and hands from the dirt that always found its way onto my body. I felt the water flow through my hands as I looked through the water in the tree line. I would always turn back at the river, for my fear of drowning kept me at bay. I would sometimes walk along that river, dipping my hands into the water as I walked. Something in me didn't feel fear of the water that day, though. I felt adventurous. I contemplated as I looked beyond the river stream. There was a whole other part of the forest beyond it, new lands to be discovered. I looked up at the sky. The sun was almost over the horizon. I thought about being out here at night, thoughts of monsters and creatures capturing me. I remembered my stories, though, the hero who saved the world from danger. Suddenly, without a second thought, it was like my body just got up and began to jump on the rocks in the river. I felt the water on my feet as I stopped on each of the rocks before jumping to the next. Once I reached the other side, I quickly ran into the forest beyond. I walked along as I studied the trees to get a good idea of my surroundings to find my way back. I made landmarks on trees out of chalk and always carry some with me so I wouldn't get lost, something I always do when traveling new terrain. Something about this area felt off, though. It was as if Mother Nature had left, leaving her creations in ruin. It was a lot darker than I thought it would be. There were so many trees that it blocked out the sun. I was a fearless kid, though. I thought that I couldn't be harmed, for nature was my dearest friend. I was wrong, though, for no one is safe from the brutality of Mother Nature. Not even me. As I walked through the forest, I looked ahead to get a good map of the terrain in my head. Shadows gathered around the forest as the dark trees hung over me like limbs from an ancient world. There was an ominous silence that filled the woods. No sounds of animals running around, no crickets or frogs chirping, no wind twirling in my ears, just pure and utter silence. The only thing I could hear was the sound of leaves crunching underfoot as I walked. I noticed a tree that looked like a hideous witch, its gnarled limbs and black claws stretching over me, almost serving as a warning not to go any further. This was a tree that had died many years ago from the look of it, succumbing to nature's life cycle. I stared at it for a few minutes, feeling an uneasiness that crawled at the back of my throat. I continued my journey across the uncharted forest, but the tree stayed embedded in my mind. There was a feeling of dread that I fought off as my heart felt uneasy. The forest seemed dead, as if it was abandoned long ago. Stumps were scattered across the forest grounds. The clumps of bushes lay among the stumps. Twigs snapped from my feet. The brown trees were so close to each other, forming a thick canopy. It was barely bright enough for me to see ahead, yet I did not stop. There was a mixture of feelings that I felt I couldn't describe. One thing was for sure, though. It felt as if I was being watched. It was like the trees had eyes of their own and were watching me very closely. My senses widened, my skin tingling. I breathed deeply and listened with great intensity. My instincts were telling me that something was off, a deep feeling that crept over me like a beast. I kept looking behind me to make sure nothing was following me, scanning my surroundings with great efficiency. That's when something caught my eye. Straight ahead, deep in the forest, barely in eyesight, stood a tall, dark figure that peered at me from behind a tree. I was paralyzed in shock, gripped by the sudden strong urge of fear that froze my entire body as I stared at whatever was ahead of me. I couldn't make out any features. It was so dark that I couldn't see the mysterious figure clearly. It felt as though our eyes were locked together, but I couldn't even see its eyes. It felt like it was staring right through my soul. I tried to convince myself it was all in my mind, but everything in me told me otherwise. It just stood there, staring at me. My body couldn't move. I tried to, but my brain had just shut off. As I looked at this creature, everything about it just didn't seem right. Its arms were so long that one of them touched the ground. The other wrapped around the tree. Its head had a weird shape to it, as if it was stretched out. The creature stood incredibly tall. It had to be at least 9 feet. It was skinny, as if it was just pure bones and nothing else. It didn't feel like an animal. It felt like two intelligent beings staring at each other. Somehow it felt even quieter than it had before, silence creeping down my whole body, paralyzing me. Everyone has a fight-or-flight reflex, but in some instances, when a human reaches a new level of fear they've never felt before, they just freeze. You try to move, but it's like you're being gripped by an invisible force, every instinct in you telling you to run, but you just can't. Even though I've fought every monster and beast in my head, when faced with real danger, I didn't fight. All I could feel was fear. Fear of the unknown, the certainty of death. A cold chill filled the air. Even with no wind, it got colder. My body violently shook, legs trembling with pure dread and fear. I felt the thing looking me up and down, as if it were studying me. Neither of us made a single move, as if it too was paralyzed. Sweat dripped down my face. I breathed heavily as a panic attack began to emerge out of the darkening pit of my hell, dragging me down as it threatened to devour me. Suddenly, the creature quickly disappeared behind the tree. The sudden movement caused my brain to snap out of its paralysis, and my legs started moving. It was like my primal instinct kicked in, instincts given to us from our primal ancestors. My mind was racing with thoughts as I wondered what it was I had just seen. I was trying to convince myself that it was just an animal, but everything in me told me that something was not right. I could hear my own heartbeat as it tried to claw its way up my chest. Keep going straight. Soon you should see a large tree that has vines wrapped around it. Once you reach that, turn right, and you should see a tree with white chalk. Keep running towards that until you see the stump that you almost fell over. Make another right and keep going forward, I thought to myself, mapping out the forest in my head. My skills of navigation have never helped me before like this, and I was running and thinking at such a speed that I was hurting both my head and my legs. I started to smell a foul stench, something that smelled like a rotten corpse. It filled the forest, and I nearly gagged once it poured into my nose. A clicking noise surrounded me, fast and animalistic. I started to hear something in the forest running behind me, footsteps sounding heavy and fast. I looked back for a second to see if I could see whatever was chasing me, but all I could see was the dark open forest. I looked back and continued my way towards the river. I weaved my way through the forest quickly, making sharp lefts and rights and turning my way back to safety. My legs felt like they were going to break. My heart was hammering at my chest as my lungs were set ablaze. I listened to the sound of running behind me. The clicking was even closer and louder than before. The smell even stronger and fouler. It, too, knew how to navigate the forest as I did, maybe even better. My skin felt cold as I shook to the point where I almost fell many times, but I always caught myself just in time. Make a sharp right turn once you reach the dead tree. Once you see the rock that stands tall, make a left and keep running straight. It was like my mind was on adrenaline too, thinking at such a pace that I never thought I could before. The running behind me sounded even closer, the stench even stronger. My legs felt as if they were going to break, yet my speed still stayed the same
as I used every ounce of energy I had. A familiar sound filled my ears, a sound I've always hated and despised. It was the river. It was close. I ignored the pain I felt in my legs and continued to run as whatever was behind me was catching up. My heart was beating like a war drum. I was running off of pure adrenaline at this point. My chest felt as if someone was squeezing my internal organs together, my feet burning from the many blisters I had. I ignored it all, though, and continued to guide myself through the cruelty of Mother Nature. I began to see the river stream. I was approaching it rapidly. My legs felt numb, my lungs on fire as I breathed heavily out of the exhaustion of fear. It sounded like it was only a few feet behind me. I knew that if I didn't reach the river, then it would catch me soon. The clicking sound was basically right in my ear. The stench was so strong that I gagged. I used every ounce of energy I had to run even quicker, ignoring all the pain I felt in my body. I hurtled out of the forest once I reached the river and jumped my way across the rocks that stuck out, falling onto my knees once I reached the other side. I quickly got back up and began to run again. I didn't stop running until my body collapsed, not being able to move. I hadn't noticed that it had turned to night, a dark umbra surrounding the forest. I was too exhausted to move. Every breath struck my chest deep. Yet there was no sign of anything chasing me or its foul smell that had followed me. The sound of wind and nature filled my ears again, replacing the terrifying clicking noises. Tears began to slowly drip down my face, mixing with my sweat. I opened my mouth to let out a whimper that never came, too exhausted to even make a sound. I wanted to go home, back to where my mother was. I started to breathe even heavier, my heart beating so fast that it was like having a heart attack. Everything became fuzzy and blurry, my mind racing with thoughts that only made me panic worse. I shook rapidly. I felt gripped by a sudden force that squeezed my body tight. My chest pounded in pain. It felt as if everything was being smashed by a hammer. I felt an impending doom dragging me down into deep darkness, deeper than any pit of despair I'd ever known. I tried to catch my breath, but it was just too much for me. I thought that whatever chased me would find me and devour my very soul. Everything was so loud, it felt like I was trapped in a tornado. I felt like I was going to throw up from the dizziness. My muscles were tense. The world was spinning around me as my heart started to pound worse than it ever had before. The pain from my chest slowly spread to my shoulders, giving a sharp pain in both of them. I got chills all over my body, gripped in fear and anxiety that had its hold on me and wouldn't let go. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was going to die a gruesome and horrifying death. I looked at the night sky as if it was in the hands of death and noticed how beautiful it looked. The pale crescent moon shone like a silver claw in the night sky. I looked upon the vast sea of stars, shining so brightly like little diamonds in the sky. Everything slowly went quiet. It was like the earth stopped. I felt the summer green grass on my hands and looked at the trees that surrounded me. Fireflies filled the darkness, sparkling like precious valuable stars in that dark place. The sound of crickets could be heard all around, chirping their song in replacement of the birds singing. My heart slowly started beating in a steady rhythm, and my breath slowed to a smooth pace. I breathed in a smell that was a woodsy fragrance, letting go of all my worries. It was as if Mother Nature cradled me in her arms, reassuring me that everything was all right. I felt a moment of tranquility, my mind silenced. I lay on the earth, admiring the beauty of the world around me. I slowly stood up, ignoring the pain I felt in my legs and chest. I welcomed back the blossoming, fragrant forest as I walked slowly through Mother Nature's creation. I began to walk home, admiring every inch of it that surrounded me. I always imagined the beautiful land in my head, landscapes of fantasy filled with bright colors. I never realized that I was already in a dazzling world filled with so many mysteries to be discovered. The forest was breathtaking tonight, sparkling in the moonlight like little crystals. I wasn't in my head on the walk home. My mind was silent for a change. Brown trees stood tall. The flowers bloomed, engulfing the forest in a smell so lush and fresh. I thanked Mother Nature that night, for she taught me a lesson that I'll never forget. I'm not invincible,
I'm no hero or great warrior. I'm just a child. Not every story needs a hero, and I don't have to be the hero in every story. I walked my way home, embracing the forest for the first time.
One last story for you, and I promise I've saved the best for last. Brought to us by Substantial Knight 788. Let's hear a tale of loss, a tale of times gone by, and a tale of the oldest profession. Let's hear about the Crystal Rose.
I'm smashed right now, drunk as hell, with a lot of emotions gyrating about my head. My mind space is a concoction of fear and anger. For the past 4 hours, I've drank vodka and orange juice, vodka cranberry juice, and finally vodka and grape juice. That's a load of screwdrivers, cosmopolitans, and I don't know, whatever you call vodka and grape juice. Well, maybe I'll make up my own name. The Crystal Room. Okay, that's dumb, but whatever. It's the Crystal Room that's on my mind right now. I had to drink myself sloppy just to have the courage to write down my experience. I have to get all the details straight and not stray too far from the truth. In 2001, my wife and I went to New York City. Surprisingly, I loved it, except for my final days there. A southerner in New York, I got the worst asinine advice and general characterization from my buddies at work. One was, don't stare at anybody on the subway. They don't like being stared at. Well, who the hell does? I don't want to live in a city where the people like being stared at. It's creepy, if otherwise. People are genuinely nice. I never had any issue with anyone on the subway, but then again, I didn't just sit there staring at people like they were animals in the zoo. Next to the last day of our vacation, we visited Times Square. I was intrigued by the constant action, the incessant visual and auditory stimuli. There was so much to see, so much to hear. My mind was scattered and unfocused. There was flashing lights and advertisements and constant blur of nameless faces and mindless crowds. I was enjoying it, but I was also a little overwhelmed. I asked my wife if we could go back to the hotel, but she wasn't ready to end the day. She assured me she was quite capable of taking care of herself. Just go back to the hotel. I won't be much longer. I can take care of myself. You sure? I said. I can tough it out. No, go, please. I'll be fine. So I walked to the nearest subway station and rode back to our hotel, which was at the end of the line in Flushing, Queens. When I got to our hotel, I slumped down in the bed and fell asleep. I was exhausted. I woke up around 3 in the morning. The bed was empty, besides me. I picked up my cell phone and called her, but I got no answer. There was a text. Honey, meet me at the Crystal Rose Room. It's just down the street from the hotel. Time on the text was 2 a.m. I remembered the place. It stood out amongst all the other crowded storefronts with a big old neon sign of a scantily dressed woman holding a red rose. What was my wife doing at a strip club? She was a regular churchgoer, never missing and always insisting I go with her. Something
something didn't seem quite right. I got dressed in a hurry and went down to the club. I tried to bull my way through, but the bouncer pushed me back, shoving his large open palm into my chest. "No, sir. Only invited guests are allowed." I got a text from my wife. She's inside." "What's her name?" Catherine Bressler." "Oh, hell yeah, Mr. Bressler. Come on in. We've been expecting you." The courteous welcome shocked me, considering that a moment before he was ready to stomp me into the ground. In a flash of a moment, I went from being a nuisance to a highly regarded guest of honor. I walked through the front door and into the past. It was an old-fashioned cabaret with the waitresses dressed in flappers, bearded dresses, and floral headbands. They were all wearing outlandish large pearl necklaces, and there was a pianist playing ragtime music with a boisterous horn assembly. The air was thick with smoke and cheap perfume. My eyes were watering, but I felt eerily comfortable, like this was where I truly belonged. On the center stage, dressed in a tight, short flapper dress, was my wife, Catherine. She was dancing as if in a trance. A man walked up on the stage and started kissing her. My wife seemed to be enjoying it a lot, and I ran up to the front of the stage. Hey, damn it, get your hands off my wife." The man stopped, turned his gaze towards me, and smiled. His mouth was full of yellow, jagged teeth, encrusted with thick layers of plaque. My wife looked at me and smiled, revealing a similar set of teeth, smaller but no less hideous. I could no longer live a lie. I want my old life back, and I know you will too, she said. "Catherine, let's get out of here. This isn't funny. I don't like this. But baby, I do." Two men grabbed me and dragged me to one of the back rooms. They pointed a gun at me and shoved me into a wooden chair. They turned the lights out and walked out of the room. I tried to run and grab the doorknob before they locked it, but I was too late. I heard a mechanical whirring and a pink light overhead was turned on. I couldn't see where the light was coming from, whether it was a lamp or a fixture in the ceiling. It almost seemed mystical, coming from an unknown source. The room now looked like I was inside a diamond with a rigid crystalline structure. There were 1,000 reflections of myself walking through the many faces of the crystal, independent of my own motion. They were alive in themselves, more than a mere reflection. One of them called out to me, "It's time to come back to your true self." I smiled with an impressive row of sharp teeth, more immaculate, more regal than what the groping stranger my wife had. My reflection stepped out of the crystal and into the plain hardwood floor, progressing slowly towards me with his hands raised, the nails of which were long and sharp. The closer he got, the paler his skin grew. He was dressed in a black suit with a colorless vest and bow tie. Atop his head was a straw boater hat. He grabbed me by the throat, and as his cold, rigid fingers touched me, I had a vision of bygone times filled with murder and debauchery. I killed and drank, lapping up the warm blood, copper-tinged blood of many hapless victims. In my past life I was a monster, a man willing to kill anyone, constantly thirsting for blood, never satisfied. You trapped me here, But I knew Catherine would never stay away. I knew the memories would come back. The thrill and the passion of it all would well up in her soul again. I fought back, pushing him away, but he lunged back at me, grabbing my wrist and bit on the side of my hand. I could feel the pressure of his mouth tightening as he sucked in as much blood as he can. His white skin began to fill with color. I punched at his head, knocking his hat to the ground. "Damn you! That's a nice hat. Don't you fight me. I am who you are, and you are me. There's no escaping." I noticed that now there were many different people, monsters, in the crystals. They were no longer my own reflection. They all looked hideous and weak, trapped in the purgatory by my own better selves. He lunged at me, but this time he flew at me head first. I dodged him, and as he came closer to the opposite wall of the crystal room, he yelled in exasperation, holding his hands out to avoid hitting his head against the wall. His hand was engulfed by that wall, submerged up to the elbow. He was laying on his stomach. "No! Pull me out! Don't do this! Don't you want to be good again? Don't you want to be God again? The power! The power!" I knew what I had to do at that point. He'd revealed too much. I put my hands on his ass and pushed the rest of his body through the crystalline wall. He appeared on the other side of that wall, banging with his fists and pleading me to let him out. "You son of a bitch, you'll be back. You can try to deny what you are, but the thirst and hunger is always there. It might be buried deep, but it's always there. And soon you'll miss your, or should I say, our Catherine." All around the room were trapped souls, damned vampiric souls waiting for their better halves to come to their senses and embrace the darkness that was once an innate part of their existence, boldly committing to the passion of murder and gluttony. They were screeching and hollering for release. I wanted to get out of the room. Visions of who I used to be were displayed across the crystals. I remembered who I was and when I was born. It was over 100 years ago. I thirsted. I hungered. I killed and destroyed families, mostly preying on the weak. And then there she was, Catherine, a murderer, fell in love. I couldn't kill her, even though my stomach felt empty as my hunger was uncontrollable. I bit her, but not to kill, only to bring her into my world with me, forever. She hated me for that, and then I found the rose crystal room. I wanted to give her back a normal existence. I kill her feeling guilty. We gave up the demons, but at a price. One day we would have to come back and once again don the cloak of a murderer, but this time in his service, obeying his every whim. The world needed balance, according to the proprietor of this fair saloon. It needed hunters to weed out the weak. I remember now. He was known as the Scarlet Shepherd. The door opened. "You're not quite ready, but you've had your time. I'm not erasing your memory. I'm not giving Catherine back either. You belong to me, but I don't want it until you're ready." I looked up to see a thin man in a red suit with a long black tie. He was wearing a black tweed cap and a chain with an upside-down cross. His goons grabbed me by the arms and dragged me out of the room, and in front of Catherine, there on stage with her now was a homeless man, dressed in ragged clothes and smelling like liquor. She looked at me and smiled and buried her teeth in his neck. He struggled, but Her grasp was too strong. She drank him dry. He collapsed to the floor. You made me. You love me. And I know one day you'll come back. I was thrown out onto the street, lonely and without my wife. The shadow of my former self still lives. I left New York with new and old memories. Some I'd hoped I would never discover again. I drink to forget my sins, but mostly to forget Catherine. I tell myself that I killed her years ago, that she never survived, and that I never really ever loved her. But then again, I told you in the beginning that I didn't want to stray too far from the truth. The truth is, I'd kill 1,000,000 souls to have her back again. And just like that, our story is at an end. But don't worry, I'm sure there'll be more cozy horror very soon. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.